Can I just say, and I
Yeah.
think this is where this ethical question comes into play, right? So who am I to design these experiences without being able to predict what kind of outcome or what kind of effect they will have in actual individuals? And I feel also in today's political environment where these many like innocuous, you would think, teaching practices are being called into question and outlawed. This is like a really maybe a very problematic thing to do, unfortunately, I guess. But
Yeah, and in response to that, bringing in what we often talk about as challenge and support, the Sanford theory of challenge and support. If you think about the ethical problem of creating disorienting dilemmas for others by challenging them without bringing the support alongside to help them restructure after they have been broken in some way, right? Then it becomes sort of an ethical imperative to balance challenge and support. Yeah, go ahead, Annette.
I think it's also difficult as a facilitator when you're being transformed, when you're in a transformative state, because I think back on Willie and I used to do the 10 lenses, and we would put up on the screen what our 10 dominant identities were in order. And as mine changed, I didn't want to discuss that as it was changing. I didn't want to lead people in that conversation because it got more and more complex for me. And I think maybe I understood how complex it was for the audience to try to do it in that stage I was in. And
yeah. I can say, though, that some of the most impactful times when I have been a really effective educator have been when I myself have been going through transformative learning processes and been very vulnerable about it and modeled coping through that with learners, because then they see it happening to somebody else and have not only a model but permission to talk about it and process it, and then that becomes that whole community of practice kind of effect happening. So the example that I'm most poignantly thinking about was the first study abroad trip that I led to China, which was completely overwhelming for me, not speaking the language, not really understanding the culture, and yet being responsible for these 15 souls who are following me around like little ducklings, and and meanwhile I'm traumatized by everything I'm experiencing, but still expected to be teacher and tour guide and nurse and mama, and I know many of you have had these experiences as well leading study abroad, but yeah.
One last question, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just thinking, I was trying to conceptualize IDC with the transformative learning, and I was just thinking, when do we say that somebody, let's say somebody is moving from a monocultural mindset to an intercultural mindset, right? Based on, because I'm just thinking okay, if we use an instrument to assess and we are using this theory to say that, okay, this is going to be the theoretical grounding for this particular research. So when do we say it is a transformative learning in that particular case?
Yeah, I would posit, and there's nothing written on this, this is just me thinking through it. I would posit that there are probably disorienting dilemmas that shift people from any one orientation to another. So to give concrete details, if you're in denial and all of a sudden you start bumping up against cultural differences, all of a sudden denial's not working for you anymore. You can no longer claim that culture doesn't matter and it's not really a thing, and right? Because it's there in your face and it's probably slapping you in the face. And so that's, I think, why people swing so far to the opposite side of the pendulum, and all they can see is difference at that point, because their worldview has really been shattered focusing on similarity, and then now they're all the way on the other side of the pendulum. So people's reaction to that then is to focus on that difference and judge it, and react at that visceral level to it without thinking through it very much. Then you have to have another disorienting dilemma, I think, to recognize what some of the harmful impacts of being in polarization are that motivates you to try to move towards motivation. So you may have a conflict that really doesn't feel good, or you may have you know, some feelings of shame about how judgmental you are being towards other people, or maybe you experience you know, an instance of communication that is clearly ineffective, and so you try to construct a self then that minimizes differences to get away from all those negative impacts that you're experiencing in polarization. So I think at every stage, something has to sort of break down and then be rebuilt along the way.
Thank you.